¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Buenas tardes a nuestro público, a
Good
nuestros
afternoon. Hello, everybody. Hello to our audience and our panel members. We want to welcome everybody to this third panel of the International Forum for Pending and Urgent Actions for the Future on the 25th anniversary of Chapter J of the Beijing Platform for Action. We want to welcome everybody. This panel is called Backlit Feminist Media. As a starting context, we could say that this morning we've had some very intense activities with a review that began with the presence of women editors in the media, and we have just concluded by reviewing the progress of the Global Media Monitoring Project. To begin this panel, we could say that with an agenda in the media that is still focused around men, we've needed to offer options to recover the presence of women as the protagonists of history. Women are making this new history and reality right here and right now. We discussed this vastly today, and we will continue to do so, focusing more on the participation of the feminist media that join us in this panel. We will remind you that we are broadcasting live in Spanish on Facebook and in English on our YouTube channel, which is MAC TV. For this panel, each of our speakers will have a few minutes to answer to the questions that we will be asking. Some of them will be open to the table, and others will be specific to a couple of our participants because of their profiles. And I am very proud to introduce them to you now. We will be asking 7 questions on the topic of our panel, and then we will have audience participation as well, with comments and questions that we are receiving over the different platforms. So let me introduce the 4 women joining us today, our 4 colleague journalists. First, we have Maria Ángeles Fernandez. She is part of the coordination team for Pícara magazine from 2016, and she has been part of the project from its start. She has a PhD in international information and a master's in globalization and development. She has over 10 years experience as a freelance journalist in different media, both for Spain and Latin America. She just received an acknowledgement together with Jairo Marcos with a John Gomez Award for journalist trajectory for her coverage. Welcome, Maria Ángeles. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hello. Thank you. We also have Lucia Laguna Huerta. She is our colleague and friend right here from Mexico. She's a specialist in journalism focused on gender, Director of Communication and Information for Women, CIMAC, and for the news agency CIMAC Noticias, co-founder of the National Network of Journalists and representative of the Global Alliance of Media and Gender in Latin America. She's a creator of the columns Reflection Zone and Transgressors. Commentator on Radio Educación and Radio Universidad de Tamaulipas. She has taught 100 workshops on journalism that is non-sexist, on being a spokesperson and strategies for communication for social, political, and journalistic organizations. Welcome, Lucia. Thank you. Thank you, Vero. We also have the participation of Silvia Trujillo. She is a social investigator and journalist currently working for the Guatemalan newspaper La Cuerda, graduated from sociology from the University of Buenos Aires, and has a master's on women's rights from the University of San Carlos de Guatemala. Thank you for your participation today, Silvia. Is she here? Yes, thank you very much, Veronica. I want also to thank CIMAC for the invitation and for holding this event. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel. Thank you, Silvia. Welcome. And finally, we have our fourth panelist, Jenny Rongren. She's a journalist, editor, and founder of Feministic Perspective, an independent weekly journal online with gender perspective, and coordinator for the International Network of Journalists with Gender Perspective, as well as a member of the Swedish Organization for Surveillance of the Media, Allt är möjligt. Thank you very much, Jenny, for joining us today. Thank you for joining us for this panel. Your microphone is off.
Es un gusto poder compartir este espacio con ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you. So let's begin. As a prelude, we've had the two panels this morning, during which, as we mentioned, we've had the presence of women and their dynamic in media.
Sobre los avances en los resultados del monitoreo global de medios.
And we also talked about the preliminary results of the GMMP. So to open up the panel, I will start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves, their context, and let's begin. I'll also start with this question. So from the experience of each of your platforms, what have been your contributions to the journalistic work? So Maria Angela, please. Right. A feminist outlet that has been run for 10 years. So our contribution can be, of course, very clearly to everyone who is in the panel and who is in the audience. We know that this is to apply the feminist outlook to the analysis of the subject matters that we take on. Now, this is not part of the agenda of the classical larger media. So at this point, I can also say that we at Cara trying to bring the outlook and practice of feminists for work into the structure of journalism. I also think it's essential. We need to bring the practice of when it comes to our work environment, the care we take, that not only paper, but that we also need to apply it to the way we work. So with this feminist practice itself, we have become quite a horizontal outlet with no hierarchy. All our decisions are made by consensus with the participation of everyone on the team. I also find it interesting to highlight the idea of taking care of each other. We all know very well what that is as women, and we need to bring that into our practice. So we do live overwhelmed, very stressful to do our work, but at the end of the day, we try to leave our personal experiences, whatever we're going through, on the side, of course, taking care of ourselves, resting, to staying at home, working from home, and so forth. So we're very flexible in order to take care of ourselves without resting in our laurels. This is something that we have achieved. Finally, so as not to exceed my time, it also has to do with how we work as colleagues. There's only 5 of us in the team at Pícara, and we read a lot of reports and articles from freelancer colleagues. We all know how to be a freelancer. However, we know that pay is not good as a freelancer, that it's not stable. So we try to keep a close approach and a dignified approach with our colleagues, and of course try to pay as soon as possible, no later than a week for every news item that is provided to us. And as opposed to, let's say, if you work for the government, they can take one day. So we have reviewed our structures. We make sure to look at who our suppliers as. We try to stay away from our transnationals, and that's something we attempted to work on, and that needs to be put on the table by most feminist media. So that's it. Thank you very much. I would just like to mention and to ask that we have sufficient time for your answers, so please take some time for the interpretation. Just to make it easier for everyone to understand. So let's move on. Lucia, same question. Right, as you know, CIMAC was created in 1998. It's been around for quite a few years now. So in that sense, a lot of what we're doing around the world, we can look at even from when we started at CIMAC, which was getting our foot in the door. First of all, we needed to get the acknowledgement that there needed to be specialized journalism from gender perspective and feminism. And that did not reduce this journalistic rigor of the practice itself. So I think that one of the contributions of CIMAC in that sense has to do with that from feminism, you can create journalism that can be rigorous, with contrast, with nuances, etc. And again, it also has to do with sources. We need to show and display the lack of sources, female sources in traditional media. We heard that specifically in the morning with our colleagues who are gender perspective editors. What this provides is new sources, female researchers, athletes, politologists, analysts, etc. And this allows us to break this male patriarchy and dominance in representation, which of course we have in most countries, where we find the 5 same politologists on every channel, on every debate table at all hours of the day. And it really makes you wonder, is there no one else? Of course, there are lots more, thankfully. And at CIMAC, it has to do a lot as well with our coverage and the topics that we cover. I remember when we were looking towards International Women's Day, this was not a part of the journalistic agenda in the 80s and 90s. It was an eccentricity. It was eccentric to think that on traditional media, we could see a chronicle or any type of report on International Women's Day, or even on November 25th, which is the International Day of the Fight Against Violence Towards Women. So then we started looking at the alliance with female journalists in Mexico, and that is how we started to really open up the gap in traditional media. We had a space for these new sources, for these new topics, and also to really debate the different focuses and to certain coverages, particularly in terms of violence towards women. And we had to make an additional effort so that traditional media stopped justifying and making it look natural, that they stopped playing not against but in favor of the aggressor, or displaying the body of the victim, so that they stopped portraying violence and making it a spectacle. So I think something else that we've shown is that we could create a feminist outlet, that we could create a feminist journalistic outlet, that we could support ourselves and make the type of news that we wanted to without completely becoming separate from traditional media. From the birth of CIMAC, we put our bets on creating an alliance with the media, with female journalists. And I think that was right on, because we have been able to set up a dialogue and the reflection of journalism that is needed today. Thank you.
Silvia, estamos con esta pregunta de la experiencia, los aportes que se han hecho a la labor periodística.
Muchísimas gracias.
Yeah, thanks very much, Veronica. Yeah, well, and adding to what my colleagues just said, yeah, La Cuerda is a feminist media that was created 23 years ago in a country that had just signed the peace agreements, where feminism at that moment, or the feminist trends at that moment, were not even discussed at the political level. It was a group of feminists concerned by what was going on in the country that promoted different events, and well, on those debates they decided to create this media. So the most important contributions, added to what our colleagues have already mentioned, well, the main one was when we opened this field to open a media outlet in a very hostile environment, so that we would bring these topics, these things that had to do with women, with the proposals that women we're bringing to the table and to the agenda, and mainly for disseminating feminist proposals. So at this first moment, it was very important to open that field. Well, nowadays, we also have to highlight the what we are doing at La Cuerda. We just turned 23 last month in a country that's, well, it's we don't have time for that, but as many of our Latin America countries, well, we have a very hostile environment, and well, La Cuerda, well, we are here, we are a media for consultation of all the feminist movement. But well, 2 years ago, we started working on the digital outlet of La Cuerda, and well, we're bringing all these proposals that we're saying, opening up to new topics, new approaches, new subjects to discuss of what's going on, the feminist perspective on the media, to bring, of course, new sources. Even at some point, we created yellow pages that we sent to all the journalists here in the country to fight against it. Like, there are no women economists, there are no women that speak about security, and we told them, no, guess what? We do have women talk about all these different topics. And yes, also adding to what my colleague from Picara said, we did our own effort, and then by when we try to visualize all these obstacles, we try to work just as we try to approach society, to fulfill these ideas, to make them come alive, to be very coherent between what we do and what we're doing in the way that we handle our work, to have a collective decision of all the different subject matters to cover. So yeah, there's a lot to say on that. And well, now we are facing this big challenge that we want to bring a new dynamic to our digital outlet. We, of course, want to keep our print media. I'll tell you more about it. But besides that, we want to bring a new dynamic. We want to bring a new dynamic to this digital outlet, because we have new audiences, we have new generations that are requesting not to change our perspective, because we still see ourselves as a feminist media, but maybe to change the way in which we approach this. And well, that's the challenge we're currently facing. Thanks very much, Silvia. So these are very important medias. All of you adapt, and at the same time to keep that professionalism when we're working. So now, Jenny, I pass the floor to you.
Hola. Bueno,
Hi. Well, I wanted to say that in Sweden, we started our career in 2011. That is 10 years already. And at that time, it was half journalist in Sweden. That's what we saw. But this was not having an impact in the content. So when we started to make progress in chapter J, well, that's very important of it. And the explanation was kind of confusing to us. Why aren't we having more efficient measurements for reducing inequality in the news content? Because, well, that would go against freedom of speech. But as we've heard throughout the day, freedom of speech for people is that we're making progress in terms of equality. And that's why it is key to have these kind of events where the connection between both, it's a starting point for everyone. And well, the mission of our foundation has been just like for others to compensate what we see that's missing in other media when it comes to gender and diversity. And we feel very close to all the problems that we've heard in all these feminist networks, and also in the political activism for inclusive media. And we give voice to people and to subjects that traditional media avoid consciously or unconsciously. So we do have a deep analysis, and we offer journalism based in knowledge, and we open up spaces for activism, for activists, for feminist topics as well. So, well, sometimes have been very obvious throughout this time. The media ignore the possibility of having a more gender balanced view in their posts, except for some moments where they are connected with individuals or scandals, for example. And well, through time, we see that this becomes more important. It's not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of will that's missing. And the great media have not been able to have this commitment, feminist commitment that we've seen in all the world in the recent years. So I'm not just thinking in the Me Too movement. So, and we've achieved some things, but there are some examples when we have this perspective of feminism that has helped to bring issues that are very important, but that have been ignored in the larger media outlets. For instance, the voices of adoptions and the irregularities of the industry of adoptions that are unveiled when they look for their origin or place of origin, or life conditions and the right of trans people, or racist stereotypes, or women in sports. So in all these examples, I think that our main existence and our interest for these and many other matters are just like the ignition. So, well, the lack of balance when it comes to gender in the media seems an ongoing situation. So, in the future, in the near future, we have to keep working with our own media. And we also have to keep working with this double task of being pedagogical and journalists at the same time. So this is not just a fight in the media structure, but it's also a fight for all society as a whole. So thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jenny. And yes, as Lucia was saying earlier in the morning, we were listening to the experiences of these gender editors in the media throughout the world. And I think that this is linked to my next question. And I would like to address this question to the experiences of Maria Angeles and Jenny. So what has been the impact of feminist journalistic work in the content of mass media, traditional media? You've already spoken a little bit about that, Jenny, but if you could elaborate a little more on that. Maria Angeles. Well, I do believe there's been an impact, and we can definitely measure that. When Picare was created 10 years ago, Well, yeah, 10 years ago. Well, there were some topics that you could just read in Pícara magazine or in critical media that had this perspective as well. And now, all those topics, you can read them anywhere. You can read them all over Spain. And I think that in recent years, there's been an expansion of the voices that write for these media and also of the outlooks and views. Well, on the one hand, there was, well, not just from these massive strikes of the 2018, but also there was some sensitization. Actually, the largest news agency, that's Agencia F, that's very big in Latin America. You might be familiar with it. So they also had their feminist section as well. So yes, it is true that it has had an impact, but in a small impact, not cross-cutting. Like all media, they have their feminist journalists, their journalist or their section on feminism, but the feminism has not, or the view has not been cross-cutting in all the media. They haven't questioned their covers. They haven't covered topics that are hard to cover or not. They haven't questioned the way that sports are covered. So yeah, they've opened the view, but just to have a small quota there. So I think that it's an interesting progress, but of course, it's not enough. And well, that's on the one hand. And then that progress that's interesting, it makes it be, well, we're more women that are writing for feminism, whether it's an hegemonic media or feministic. So that allows us to have some discussions, some debates, so that we can have so that we can learn from each other, and that's always very interesting. And then for media such as Picara, that's a small media, to have great media having great coverage of a strike, of femicide or mass or these different topics, well, it places us again in the agenda because we cannot compete when it comes to resources. I mean, so that replaces us or repositions us to see what we can offer as a media. And well, I guess that we have this new media panorama, and yeah, as I said earlier, this feminist view being cross-cutting in all the sections, in all the critic to the system. Well, not it's not being done by everyone. So well, more media working on different things, but we still have lots of things to do. So yeah, we're really very happy that situations are changing, that's more diverse, and it forces us to analyze and to see what is the role that we're playing in these media, that where people are becoming more aware, and they want to hear more the feminist view. Okay, so Jenny spoke about these previous she touched upon these topics, but Jenny, if you could elaborate on what you mentioned earlier. So how is it that this cross-cutting approach in the feministic vision, and from your experience, what's your experience on that? Well, yes, I do agree with what Maria Angeles has said. I believe that what we've experienced here, well, we've had a new wave of feminism here. When we started with this environment for feminism, it was very negative. And then all the comments were not moderated. So we would have threats and hate against female journalists. So, well, this is a topic that we covered since the beginning. Well, now that's also a big subject for many other media outlets, but it was a separate thing. It was just for extreme people, so, or radical. But well, there's some kind of influence that we've had, and we have always tried to cover different topics in journalism, not just black and white, not feminist, anti-feminist. So in other media, well, there's sometimes a trend of having people that have an opposed point of view. So that's kind of being sensationalist, like that it attracts lots of readers and that it brings lots of clicks as well, but that is not helping understand the perspective of rights that's in feminism. So I think that just as all the media industry, we are facing a crisis. We are always trying to find the resources to keep publishing. So yeah, we could be very sensationalist if just the goal was to get resources. That if we want to do that, we could do it through sensationalism because it's a very popular topic now. So I think that that's very important when it comes to feminism and journalism. And yeah, we have to bring all these topics and cover many different topics, and that women are not all the same, or that all feminists do not agree in how to break patterns. um I also think that just as Maria Angeles said, in each newsroom there are one or two feminists. So an influence that the feminist media have is that, look, like this is also news. So journalists that are lonely in their media, they might have something that's check news and they find news. And well, that's also a kind of an example. So that has also been key. Thanks very much, Jenny. Yeah, for sure. And well, this influence can come from many different spaces, from our spaces. But yeah, I do believe that this is a moment, a very important moment to highlight this opportunity that this media has opened with a gender perspective, and what we all can do in that same path. Okay, so in the previous panel, we heard about all the global monitoring that showed a result that of a stagnation that we see of the presence of women in the media. So this is linked to two questions that I have so that we can review where we're standing. And this is a question to all of you. So do you believe that there's progress in the recognition of feminist journalism? And what have been the impacts of this recognition? Maria Angeles, the floor is yours. Yes, I do believe that we've made some progress in the recognition. I mean, when the other media expand their vision and the coverage, so well, they're aware that they've been neglecting or leaving a part of reality behind. That they were reporting on limited topics and that they did not have an impact on a lot of people. Topics that affect women did not have a presence in the media. So yeah, I do believe that when we bring the feminist view to the media, there's a recognition, symbolic if you will, but if they have space in the media, if the movement, the feminist movement has something, well, that has a meaning, of course. And well, in Pícara, we've also seen this symbolically, but it is true that in recent years, we have received recognition. We have received awards for our job, and beyond all this symbolism, well, they are things that cheer us up, because we know that this is a hard profession that we have. So I do believe that Pícara as a media has been assessed when it comes to the yeah, when people that work in other media, And we haven't felt excluded. Like, well, there might be some cases, but yeah, we've always been taken into account, and we've done a very serious work and professional work as well. And well, I think that the impact, what's been the impact? Well, we have to insist that CIMAX, after 28 years, or that Jenny has also been for 10 years, that La Cuerda has 20, almost 20 years, 23, I think you said 23, right? Mhm. So yeah, I do believe that, well, if we are still here, that's a recognition to our work. I know that it's hard to exist, but that we're here after all this time confirms this need of all the topics that we cover. Thanks very much. Yeah, and now, Lucia, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias.
Thanks very much. Well, I think that we have different experiences. I'm thinking a little bit of what happened this morning with the gender editors and with our Mexican experience, where I do think that there's a recognition of the role that feminist journalists have done in the resistance and insistence of bringing to the agenda all these topics that have not been present in traditional media because of the reading that they do of reality from their end. But, however, I do think that there's an attitude that, okay, it's great that they do that, but they should not come here. It's great that they try with this effort, but that we can sometimes have some partnerships, but that they don't go beyond that. That is the challenge that I see. Well, something that catches my attention, something that my editor colleagues in the morning said, is like these great feminist movements. Well, some media were approached and they said, okay, this is good news. Something's happening here, so we have to cover these and we have to do something to cover these because, well, I'm thinking of what my colleagues from Argentina said earlier, or the colleagues from Spain said that 8M or this green wave shocked all the media. And I'm also thinking what my colleague from Silla Rota, La Cadera de Eva, said that after this movement that we have in Mexico, after these sexual violence of police against the victims, well, I don't know if you remember, but this led to a huge movement. And then the media said, okay, there's something going on. So we have to get ready so that we can cover all that. And there are many elements that are now acting on that behalf. We have the feminist media with the story that has expanded, showing what journalism is not seeing. This bias that journalism has had, that hasn't seen women as subjects and of the story and protagonists of the story. We also have all these feminist movements that we've had that they speak about a different dynamic, and that they are appealing to the mass media in their sexist way of covering reality, and that they're asking all that media to be able to achieve that they see things in a different way. But I'm also thinking in the history of CIMAC itself. Well, at the beginning, I told you that CIMAC had a partnership with different media outlets. I'm thinking in the Proceso magazine, for example, and how the magazine itself has been adding these to their agenda, their feminist agenda, to prepare and to add to that reflection on the logic of the magazine itself. So I think that this has happened with different media. Like, for example, reading the news that CIMAC was posting on a regular basis. Yeah, this made I mean, they started asking different questions. Like, why did that happen? Why is that happening? Why is it like that? Why do we have to have this approach? And they were also assuming that they had to include it to their own dynamic in order to respond to a reality that's also happening, and it's all these feminist demonstrations that, of course, are demanding a different vision of the media, of the mass media. So all these factors are nowadays playing towards a reflection that, of course, well, this is something that brings for feminists. I don't know if we, with that clarity, but of course, it's been a historic thing that we brought through the years, because we do have our we have people before us that opened this path so that we could be here. Thanks very much. So we have two very diverse visions, very diverse and interesting. Let's see what Silvia has to say. The floor is yours, Silvia. Well, I would like to separate a little bit this recognition in three areas. There's the first one that has to do with corporate media, where, yeah, of course, there's been an impact. There's been an impact when, well, and they don't recognize it necessarily. Like they say, okay, yeah, this we're adding to it, and it comes from the work of feminists and journalists. But we got lots of surprises this year. They're one of the print media, well, that's digital, but it's a print media that we have here in Guatemala. They have a full cap, a full cover to see what's missing. They have a cover, a full cover of all the work that we were doing on femicide. So this year, actually, we kept it. I mean, we're collecting it because this is part of all these paths that we've done, and that we're bringing this topic to this country, like femicide. Well, in all countries, like femicide is a problem that we have in our countries. So this is the first dimension where, yeah, as I'm saying, we are not necessarily acknowledged or recognized for this, but we start to see the results already. Of course, there's a long way. We still have to go a long way, but we're on our way. And then there's a second area that I'd like to recognize, that it has to do with the recognition that we see more from community media, that we see from the media that could be called alternative media, through the new media that's coming in all these different areas around Guatemala. And yeah, like they're calling us more frequently. Like, for instance, we just opened now because of the pandemic and all this digital world. We have opened lots of courses, lots of workshops, and lots of male and female journalists of all different ages come, and they want to join this, and they say, I want to listen to the proposal of this journalism. So there's a huge thing that we have to keep developing on that field. But yeah, like, for example, media of women that are on the radio, very young people that live very close here to Chinantenango, and we have also a kind of partnership. They have developed different activities with us. So yeah, and also the recognition that we have been picking up from all social organizations, from organized women, that they not just recognize what we're doing, but they also try to find us, so that our media is a platform for them to post what they're creating, what they're discussing, of the proposals, the requests, etc. So yeah, we were surprised too, because one of the challenges that we face now in this digital area, and we're going there, of course, but we were saying, like, how can we make all these print material available to communities? And well, we came up with different ideas, but we loved it because social media would show the picture, and they would say, hey, I got La Cuerda already, the print magazine, and we were really very satisfied by that. Okay, so we overcame that burden for reaching out to communities, but they're also telling us, I have it here, and that was also part of that we've achieved. So yeah, we're still working the path, a long way, but we're there.
Muchas gracias. Por último, vamos con Jenny. Les recuerdo, por favor, que
Thank
tenemos...
you. And last, we'll hear from Jenny.
Bueno, yo creo que el tercer reconocimiento de los movimientos
I
feministas.
think that the third acknowledgement of the feminist and women's movement is that relies on us a lot more, and all the groups that cover their issues.
Durante los 10 años hemos visto
Over the last 10 years,
relaciones hacia
we've looked at different relationships that other media have had with us. I can say in this regard that in the times when feminism has had this acknowledgement among Swedish society, that has also been helpful for us. In this sense, we have also had cooperation with different media, but with all the advances and progress that anti-rights groups have had, as well as extreme right groups, there seems to be a need to keep our distance and have a greater gap with media that are considered to be extreme left or extreme feminism. So in this way, there has also been a change. So now we're not seeing, let's say, as many invitations to talk about feminism and the way things used to be, but that is mostly constantly changing. It's about persisting. Thank you very much, Jenny, and you said that right. We need to persist. So we've heard of examples now of some media outlets that are following this line, where we have the participation of and even the perspective of feminist groups. So Silvia, I would like to ask you about the strategies that you have developed to become sustainable and what challenges are you facing? Excellent question. So let's see. To start with, essentially, we're bringing our outlet forward through the cooperation. That is our main contribution. We do not sell advertising, either in print or digital. However, this is not free of complications. Right now, I was thinking of what Maria Angeles was saying. We try to be consistent and coherent, but this implies a big effort, and we might exploit ourselves because, in addition to our journalistic work, we're carrying out our resource management and our reporting and everything that takes up a lot of our time. So there's that one large block, which is also part of what sustains us. We've also carried out self-sustainability processes, such as trying to sell subscriptions. We haven't really done very well there. We need a lot more work on how to manage this business model, which is feminist and respects your feminist values and ethics. You have no idea how many debates we've had discussing how to move forward with that idea. And the pandemic has also really held us back a lot, but we have a lot of fundraising activities. We used to have parties, types of activities, which are obviously not our main source of income. But in a way, it has also been very useful. Basically, that's it. Then we also talk about distribution, which is expensive, especially for print media, and that's another challenge we face. So how are we managing? Well, again, working virtually generated a different reality. We're working with alliances with different departments, like we send our package to our distribution department and they do the distribution in a way that cuts our costs and we get La Cuerda to even the furthest communities. So that's something that we've been discussing over time in our sustainability process. We have also worked about this transition to the digital outlet, where we're debating how to be sustainable there as well. Find other sources. We know that solidarity cooperation would not last forever. So we're under discussions, we're building an audience, and right now that's exactly where we're at. Thank you, Sylvia. I'm sure that's a very difficult time that we're going through, not just yourselves, but all the media, all these outlets. Now, you brought up the pandemic, so I would like to ask Lucia. We've referred to these new challenges to keep going with our journalistic work as part of the pandemic. So, Lucia, what can you say about that? Well, I think there are several challenges we're facing. One of them is the conditions that our female journalists have dealt with, which is mostly having to work from home. And also having this social burden of care. Not all our female journalists have a support system to carry on with their usual activities. So for a lot of them, it has been a challenge that they face as part of their daily life. Then we have outlets such as CIMAC, feminist outlet, which are not exempt from this either. We don't have all the necessary conditions at times to fulfill our work. Now, I can guarantee that those of us who are working were given the proper conditions, such as internet access, which at least in this country is an absolute challenge. Connectivity is a challenge, and the pandemic showed us how unequal we access and quality connections, because you can have a connection, but it can be terrible. So that's a total challenge. And a second one has to do with our informative coverage. How can we continue to do our work without putting ourselves at risk? How can we make sure we have protective conditions if we get out, go on the street and make, I don't know, interview someone? How can we make ourselves safe? But then again, we have issues outside the pandemic. I think coverage has focused a lot on the vaccine, which one works, which one doesn't, when is it starting, and even at the very start of the pandemic, when we were talking about what it would mean specifically for Latin America, for the progress of women, where the main thought was that it would be terrible disadvantage. The general mainstream media did not take it back up. The matter of violence against women has been terrible because, of course, lockdown has led women to be enclosed with their aggressors without the state actually being prepared to guarantee there would be security mechanisms for those women. How can you ask for help? How do you file against it? How do you press charges if you're living with your aggressor, specifically if you don't have, if you're not independent, if you cannot even make a phone call for help? Anyway, that's what we've been working on. We had a very interesting collaborative job related to the lack of state policy within the framework of that pandemic to guarantee women lifetime free of violence, which is guaranteed by the law. So we also have to look at what happened to teenage girls, which is not something frequently discussed. What is happening to these young women? That has been our main task, to place these topics within the framework of the pandemic, guaranteeing our safety and our stability within those terms of keeping our jobs. Thank you very much, Lucia. Right, those are very important points that you touch upon, and that became evidence of a crisis, of the conditions in which many of our colleagues had to continue working during the pandemic, at least in Mexico and Latin America, as well as all around the world, and what it has meant in terms of costs, our health, and the losses they may have experienced. But we have this additional scenario of lockdown, and what it meant for women within the framework of violence at home and even violence at work, because of layoffs, for example, or again, women being the ones that are in charge of taking care of everyone at home. So for this last item of our first day, we go to this next question, which relates to the new reality. Everything that the pandemic and lockdown still imply for the world, for ourselves, for us feminist journalists and feminist media outlets. So my question is for all of you. What conditions do you think are needed to continue doing our work? And to continue doing this whole task. So what do we need? What is missing? We lost you, Veronica. We didn't hear your complete question. Did you hear the question? I did, yeah, but I can start. Right, you asked about the conditions we need to do our work. Right, I think that the situation Silvia described for La Cuerda, where we had to constantly look for resources and restate our project model, our business model, I know exactly your case, but I'm sure it's what we all share, that we need to constantly rethink, which takes a lot of time and energy. It's not just reporting, writing, asking questions. At Picara, we've started working on a consolidation of our material resources and trying to work basically on our subscription base of friends and who pays the fee to get the magazine. We try to make that to keep our structure. We've grown very slowly. We've always been very cautious in that. We've never taken on large projects if we know we can't afford them. On a week, we publish what we know we can pay for, because we do not want to fall in debt. We don't want to owe money either to any of our collaborators. So in that sense, we've been very strict on that. And for us, we need a large enough subscription base to survive. What we do to sustain our project is we provide a lot of counseling and advisory services for the people who subcontract us. Sometimes there's a bit of a cycle where we hire someone and that person delegates and so forth, but we need to take time to write and think through. That would be ideal. But we're working towards that step by step. Again, we're very cautious. There's only 5 of us in the team. We're not taking on large projects that we cannot undertake because of our finances. So in terms of making Picara sustainable and having ideal conditions, we would definitely be able to rely on our subscribers, and we're doing okay. We're doing very well. It could be a lot better though. So, Lucia, what are your expectations? Okay, I see that there are a lot of challenges. Just as Picara, just as La Cuerda, to get to how old we are, we've had to juggle a million things as well. I think we would also need to have a very clear statement from the institutions that are supporting the development of independent journalism. And I would like to relate this to a question I saw on our chat group. There are still a lot of journalists that think that feminist journalism is militant and it's activism, but it's not journalism. Now, there's this idea that we still see in a lot of spaces, and it's something that we have in the Beijing platform, which is supporting feminist journalism. For that, we need a clear funding, which we have not reached after 25 years. We haven't gotten that from the UN, nor from international cooperation, nor from any institutions. But we have, in fact, proven that what we do is, in fact, journalism with an essential feature, which is the fact that we cover that lack of traditional journalism, which is militant of a macho culture, militant of misogyny, and they're not questioned. How can they be journalists and macho militants? Are they one or the other? I think that we need to change that question. Again, the emphasis falls on us. It's been years since we started to prove that what we do is journalism, that we have this rigor of information with nuance, with sources that are true, that we...
Y creo que es momento de que exista una claridad.
And I think that it's time for there to be clarity.
Como dice María Ángeles, tener tiempo de pensar, tener tiempo de escribir, tener tiempo de editar, tener tiempo de planear.
As María Ángeles said, we need to have the time to edit and look at the information that we're trying to cover. The world of feminist journalistic coverage is huge. So we still need time to look at a lot of projects, at a lot of topics that we don't have the time to cover because sometimes we don't have the conditions for it, the material resources either. I'm sorry, Lucia, could you just disable your speaker, turn off your speaker?
Bueno, pues eso, me parece que esa sería una apuesta y que creo que
right. I think that's what we need to bet on, and we need to look at how to take the lead and strengthen those outlets that have come up, and not just leave the responsibility to each of them to look for the best strategy to survive, but to actually bet on them to continue their work. Thank you, Silvia. What can you tell us about this great issue related to our conditions? Right, I have to agree with María Ángeles and Lucia. We need to keep looking for a way to not be exposed to double, triple shifts, or even longer, like we do. What Lucia said, we are giving workshops, we're doing consulting, everything to just create funding. Now, one of the things we're doing this year to expand our portfolio is thinking about certain interested actors so that we can do a certain mapping, and perhaps a certain actor can be interested in a proposal that we have, and then we can also incorporate the journalism that we're doing towards emancipation, We need to include, for example, in Guatemala, some of the indigenous peoples, and we need to include also gender perspective as well in there. Now, I have to agree with Lucia. At the end of the day, the responsibility is on us. There are a lot of things that we do that we need to keep an eye on, and we need to continue to think about how to find funding, what the actual actors would have to be the ones that come up to us and tell us, we're interested in funding you. So we have to look at another field as well, which is that it's not necessarily financial sustainability, but definitely keeping the outlet within this line of thought that we have and try to fight this constant attack that we see from the new anti-rights groups, each time with a larger aim at creating content to defend their fundamentalist line of thought. So in this sense, we know that we are in the eye of the hurricane. So for now, we haven't really felt this attack in a very direct form, but it does implicate us. And we need to improve our strategies for our digital and physical safety, which is what we're thinking about. We need to sustain this media like what you're suggesting. We need to have an open debate with the different currents of feminism, with a context that looks at everything as a whole, including the denial of certain actors of feminism. And we also have to look at sustainability within this context, which can be complicated for the freedom of speech. Thank you very much. Finally, Jenny. Right. I also have to agree with all my colleague panelists. I agree with all of them. Financing is always a difficult issue. We started volunteering.
Realmente son adaptadas para prensa.
We've managed to get funds that is adapted for journalism. However, we are exclusively digital at the time, and we wanted to have some technical developments which are not covered by this type of funding. So this has always been a bit difficult for a small outlet. So at this time, we're trying to think about different means of funding or different ways to work around it. But I think it's at this time, it's also about keeping on with our feminist task and not being carried away by the circumstances. Now, as Maria Angeles mentioned, our idea was also to pay other women to make some feminist journalism. But we also wanted to have an organization without a hierarchy, and we had a lot of ideals. But for example, people who can pay a lot don't necessarily have the same ideas that we have. So we get proposals over Facebook on how to improve our material to come up higher with the algorithm, or for people who want to pay for journalism. And that's the problem, that we don't want to adapt. We want to influence. So it needs to reach a balance. Now, what's good about events such as this one is that we get to know each other. We continue to build networks of people who share the same vision of opposing or getting to the opposite side of the anti-rights groups. So all the cooperation, all the collaboration that we can build to open new paths, and also sometimes even to exchange materials and ideas, is something that we're looking at through the international network of journalists with gender perspective. So we need to really get to know each other and see what we can do as a whole to sustain ourselves for the future. Thank you very much to our 4 panelists. We have a few questions that have come up on the chat. I think that Lucia has already answered one of our questions. And of course, there's a greeting from the National Association of Journalists of Peru. And we have some additional questions. So I would ask Silvia to answer the following question. So what should we do to try to find resources? Well, I can tell you about our debate over the last few months.
Let me give you context. We decided to have this double dynamic. I mean, to keep with the La Cuerda, that's the print version that it arrives to all communities, and mainly that many communities do not have access to the internet, and we want to keep that one. And also to make a digital media grow that started 2 years ago. And well, of course, we're facing all the challenges, like having an agenda with this new media. And so we started this process analyzing who could be some kind of like the different options of stakeholders that could be interested in the topics that we cover. So yeah, we do that by country, by region, but that was a very strong decision that we have to take, and it's not just like adjusting or adapting to the agenda of others or to adapt to what others are saying, but it's from our end, from our principles, our ethic. What are we bringing? How could we build partnership with those stakeholders that, of course, there are stakeholders that we agree politically speaking. I mean, we're not going to ask mining companies or other kinds of companies that they finance our project because we do not want to work with them. Actually, we bring all these stories to the extraction companies and to mining companies. So yeah, on the other hand, we're also working on research of our audiences. That's important information to know our audiences, to know what are the characteristics that they have, to know what are the topics they want to listen, like what are the perspective. Like one of the questions were like, what do we think of some different type of media? And well, we had that discussion at some point, like, yeah, let's talk about OnlyFans, and some of them said, no, this has nothing to do with us. And then we said, no, isn't it that we are thinking in the contents from our generation? But the thing is that there's a generation out there that's reading this. So get to know our audiences allows us to be more certain, and not in the contents, but in the way that we share this information, which are the platforms that we're using. And that gives us more information so that when we have to go and see and negotiate with these stakeholders to have a very clear agenda, to have our subjects very clear, our topics very clear. When we started here, we said, okay, we build, or we want to encourage a critical mass and political subjects, and well, we had to be subject to these, but when we had to be clear with what this emancipation, and while in communication we know that you speak to everyone, and in the end you're not speaking to anyone specifically. So I do think that this has to do with research on our own, research on what we're doing, and then again, who's out there that might be interested in this, and to have clarity. At least we do have that clarity of saying, okay, there's this cooperation and solidarity, but we cannot think that we're going to survive like 25 more years with this logic. I mean, we have to start thinking in new ways, like what Maria Angeles was saying, thinking in people that are registered. This is starting in Guatemala because of the conditions that we have in the country. We still need some time to achieve that, but well, that's part of the strategies that we're discussing, and we're on that path now. We're discussing that, having subscribers as an option. All right, thanks very much. So to wrap up with the questions and to wrap up with today's table, I ask you to tell me what's your main method for what is it that we have as an example? What that are a way of learning for everyone? Maria Angeles, please. Well, I like what Jenny said, that we don't want to adapt, we want to have an influence. And I think that that's very important. And also with what Sylvia said, to build storytelling. I think that feminist media, as we've all seen, well, we are working, we have our own agendas, and if we are having spaces in the mass media, well, I believe that that is a very good and interesting goal. Yeah, we've achieved so, but you don't get it all the time. Sometimes you get it and you don't even have the goal. You don't know what are the things that are at game, like this clickbait thing, what becomes viral. This has been positive because sometimes you post something and that leads to some discussion. So that's what I would keep, like, to be the influence and to create storytelling in a moment where the far right fascism is growing, like all these groups, anti-rights, are expanding. So yeah, they are getting space in the Spanish state as well, and they have feminists and people now, like they have these and to get more spaces to that is a challenge that we all journalists have, and feminist journalists even more. So I would leave it there. Thanks very much, Lucia. Yes, I do agree. I do agree that, yeah, to have incidents, and well, that's part of our challenges, but also to strengthen our media so that we can have all this advocacy and to have this storytelling, because if not, it's really very hard to keep them and to maintain them. We have to respond not just to survive, but also to consolidate this bed that we've created in our countries, and to make this kind of journalism what's normal, that we're not an exception, but that we are the rule. Okay, thank you. That is a great phrase. Okay, I would agree. I fully agree with what my colleagues had said. I would agree that, and I would add that we have the challenge of building to walk that path. Someone said in the comments, like, for many or for lots of people, feminism or journalism or feminism is just about women and their rights. And we have a challenge there. And that challenge has to do with working so that our journalism covers all topics around of us, but from our own vision. Of course, we're going to keep strengthening all these sources of women. Of course, we're going to bring in the agenda what women are doing. But if we want to have some incidence, if we want to advocate and have incidence in the population, it's what do we have in the agenda? What's our approach? What's in our agenda? What do we have to say? That is a challenge that we have to see, to challenge ourselves to, well, we've always said, like, how does this affect women? Who are the sources? And how can we cover this topic? But it's also like on this that's happening here that we have in the agenda, what do we have to say? And I think that's an important matter as well. Yes. What we have as a challenge when it comes to incidency, it's adding to this phrase that we have in this question, is to change that vision that thinks that it's wrong or that it's sectarian just to, or to talk just from the side of women. It's not just women. I mean, to remove that word just, because we will keep talking about this and working on journalism for and about incidents and advocacy for the presence of women and the equality as well. So Jenny, please, the floor is yours. Well, yes, I do agree with what you've said. When we started our project, we had the expectation of not just starting by censorship. I mean, that's just 30% of sources and news were women, but also to complicate all these topics that are covered or subjects that are in society that they say they're topics of women or subject, or that they're not from women, and to include the diversity perspective in these. But well, the stagnation that you were discussing in chapter J, well, we've seen that since the beginning in Sweden. When we started participating in this global monitoring of media was in the year 2000. And all those years, all the monitoring that we've done, we've been in 30% of women news. So our work of compensating this lack of women hasn't finished. It's not over. And as a small media that we are, we won't be able to achieve. So we have to have some influence so that these numbers change. Because, well, there are a lot of examples, very good examples, where other media have a good coverage for these type of matters. But and then they change journalism from the inside. They change the way in which they share the work they do in the newsrooms. But it's not the dominance. We still have to work on that. We have to keep working on this media that we show, well, that the norm of how news are done. It's also picking it. We have to make it more complex, and at the same time we have to have influence in the media, that's not on board yet. Thanks very much, Jenny. So yeah, well, finishing today's table, we're done with the activities of this first day. This International Forum of the Pending Issues, 25 years from the Beijing platform. So thanks very much to our 4 speakers. Thanks very much, Angeles, Lucia, Silvia, Lilan. Thanks very much. And well, tomorrow we will resume with our activities at 9 o'clock in the morning Mexico City time, we will talk about freedom of speech, and we will have a second panel on feminist media. So we'll see you tomorrow, and thanks very much for your attention and for participating today.
Hasta luego.
So long.
Muy buenas tardes. La transmisión por Facebook